Okay, for our last piece of the model, we're going to have to change the viewports a little and change our images so that we can see a little bit more the actual object we're working with. So I'm going to hit D on the keyboard, go to our backdrop, and in our bottom left viewport from back, I'm going to go to front, and that way we can see this whole object here that we're going to be working with. We also need to change our viewport to front. But we'll do that once we get this done. And back right, we'll take a look at our right viewport, and we can see that we see that side of the object a lot better too. So we click OK. This is still in the right viewport. We're going to change this to front, and now we can see that a whole lot better. We might also want to do is actually go back to backdrop, and in the top left we can change that to bottom. Click OK and change that to bottom. And that way everything lines up correctly, and we can see a little bit more of the object because we're working on this piece now, which is our last piece, which comes around on the side a little bit here, which is actually an extrusion on the side. And we're going to be starting out with our box and metaforming it, and then pulling off the tubes on the side here. So in a brand new third layer, we'll start this out the same way we started our other ones. The box, and we want to delete that tessellation in there. So we can just hit the left arrow key while the mouse cursor is in the right viewport, and we're just going to move down and move out the sides of this box just a little. Hit spacebar, Shift D, and metaform. And we're just going to grab these points and pull them down. And actually, what I'm keeping in mind here is the arteries that are going to come out of this, because we see we have these sections right here. We're meeting that up correctly, and we're going to meet that up correctly right there too, because we are going to be extruding this extra section out here before we go ahead and metaform this. And since this is a rather uncomplex part, we don't really need to have that much geometry in order to work on these sections, but I do want to extrude most of these pieces before we go ahead and metaform it and start working on the finer detail. So I want to make sure that we have these points on the ends right here, so what we can do is extrude these two top polygons, or actually there's 4 of them, but I will be rearranging them, so it is just 2, and we can just pull that up, and down here we'll just be using the 1. We'll need to make some changes for that, but right now we're going to pull out this second little piece right here, and we might even want to actually pull these points inward, because it is going to curve around that first part of the model. So we just want to kind of take a look at that really quick. I'll go ahead to the third layer and just hit tab to metaform that, and as you can see, actually one of our arteries is kind of poking into that section, and we can just Control T and move that in, because that will be pretty much right up against that anyway, and we just want to make that curvature around there, just so that when it's not intersecting. We can always edit that too and kind of pull that out, which I think we are going to need to do. Okay, so we also want to edit this part right here in the front a little. Just dragging these points down, because we're going to be using these polygons right here to kind of extrude out that extra piece that's going to kind of wrap around just a little, not too far. So Control T for drag, and we just want to make sure that this object is close enough to the first object where we kind of have this nice wraparound, because we don't want it to be far away from that, because this is one of the pieces that's directly connected to it. not actually connected as far as connecting the polygons, things like that, but as far as when we look at it, it's going to look like it's actually part of that piece. So we want to pull these down, and we actually need to kind of flatten that out just a little. And now we can grab these two polygons in front and hit Shift F, right mouse click, T to move them. And we actually have a little bit of a weird effect going on here. And I'm going to undo that. Because we did get a little bit of a weird effect, and that might just because the positioning. And separate that from the other layers. Control F, right mouse click, and T to move that out. And now we kind of got rid of that little problem we had there. Okay, we'll show all of our layers again by holding down Shift, and we're going to pull these new polygons and new points inward. And we also need to pull this up a little because we're looking at the top view, or sorry, our right view over here, and we can see that it does come up a little bit farther. But I want to make our geometry first and then go into the perspective view and actually change that. So Shift F one more time, right mouse click, T move that, Y to rotate. And now we can hit 0 on the keyboard, on the number pad, while moved over the viewport in the perspective view, and start editing these points. And I'm going to deselect all the polygons so I can go in here and actually edit our other points that we have. And we want to pull this upward. And we don't want that sticking out that far, so we're going to move that. And we will be metaforming this so we can make the geometry a little bit better. But just taking a look, and actually this does need to come down a little because this kind of curves upward. And if you get to a point like right here where we need to edit this point down here and you can't see it, just go into that viewport or that layer by itself and pull it in, and then you can work with it by being able to see it. And we'll do a little bit of editing over here, just pulling this into place, pulling that out. And now we can pretty much go on to making our tube up here and the tube down here for our main artery that kind of goes in and out of our heart. What we may even need to do a little is pull that out before we metaform it, and we can start working on some of the detail. But we'll come back and tweak a lot of this later, because a lot of this is going to be real tweaking. And one of the things about tweaking the model, once you kind of have the major thing done, is a lot of people ask me, when do you stop? And the thing is, I never stop. I come back to models, and I could be working on them for a year, and I'll just come back to it and keep tweaking on it more and more and more. And every time I open it up, every time I look at it, I need to tweak it just a little bit more, and just keep doing it until it's almost perfect. But the thing is, it's never going to be perfect, and sometimes you'll spend far too much time tweaking an object. So pretty much you just want to get to the point where you say, hey, that looks okay, that should be good enough, and not just spend a ridiculous amount of time on it. And a good thing to do is set a time limit. Just say I'm going to tweak it for an hour and a half or half an hour, and you just don't want to go too far into it, because otherwise you just spend all your time tweaking the model kind of as I am right now, just little tiny spots here and there that don't make all that huge of a difference comparatively to the actual modeling process. So sometimes you just have to know when to stop. So I'm just going to pull up these bits right here and pull this inward. And I'm just working on the polygons now that we're going to be using for that main tube. Or actually, we could probably just use one polygon for that, which is going to be one of these two, but I gotta kind of bring it into place. Maybe I think I will just use the tube just because it is spread out a little bit more, and I could just work around with it. And we're going to lift that up through here. So I'm just going to grab these two polygons and then hit Shift F, right mouse click, and T, and I can move it upward, and then Shift T for the drag tool, and I kind of want to drag this into a circle shape. And sometimes I just like doing this stuff in the perspective view because it's a little bit easier sometimes to see what's going on, and you don't necessarily have to play around with it forever. But as you can see, it's not entirely straight, so I am going to hit 0 and go back to our 4 viewport and rotate that, move it up, just so we can get that flat and it will be easier to work with. Alright, I'll go ahead and do the second one. So smooth shift, T to move that up, and I'm just going to move it all the way up to the top. Move that over, rotate it, and smooth shift it one more time and bring it up. And then we can deselect everything, go back into that full view, and kind of play around with this. And it's not perfectly round, because it's not going to be. In the actual model we had before, it's not perfectly round either. There are parts of it that kind of come in a little bit, and you'll see that more when we have more detail and we actually have more points and polygons we can actually edit. But now we can just come in here and join that up. Okay, and now we want to kind of make that temporary hole in there. So smooth shift and then stretch it a little, T to move it. I'm going to drag that point in just a little. And then I can move that down into the object. And that should be good. Spacebar to end the tool. And click on this gray area to deselect polygons. And now just kind of move that into place. But it doesn't look like I have actually enough geometry in here to kind of create that nice little lip around there that I'm going to need a little bit later. So there's one tool we can use but we haven't used yet, and that is Bandsaw, or Bandsaw Pro. Go to Multiply, select Bandsaw Pro, hit N on the keyboard, and we're going to select Actions, Activate, Enable Divide. Control is disabled, so we are having a little bit of trouble. And actually, because that's not working right now, I'm just going to go in there and knife that. Making sure those polygons were selected. And we can just bring that inward. Which just gives us a little more geometry, something more to work with, which we'll need a little bit more later. And we can pull that up and then out. And it'll look much better later. Kind of take a look at what we have so far. We can tweak that just a little. Maybe pull that inward. And now what we have to do is this last one down here. And we want to be using one polygon for that. It is a bit smaller, not too much, but a tiny bit smaller than this one. So I am going to select that polygon, and actually now looking at the images, should probably bring that out just a little bit more before we go ahead and do that. Just pulling out these points here so that kind of lines up. And now we can grab that, Shift F, right mouse click, bring it down just a little, kind of align our points a little bit better. And one more time, smooth shift it, and bring it down. H to stretch that. And I'm just going to go in here and edit that just a tiny bit using the drag tool. Some more tweaking, as usual. We'll grab that polygon right there, smooth shift it, stretch it inward, and then smooth shift it one more time and bring it in just so we get that nice little lip and our temporary hole. And now we take a look at our object, and it's pretty much done. As far as our base model, we do need to still add those top pieces on there. So we will need to subdivide and add a few more things on. What I also want to do before we go ahead and do that is start bringing in and connecting our holes between all of our different arteries in here. These ones, bringing them inward. They might not be connected on this main one right here, or we could. It really depends, because technically this would be kind of an open chamber, so we might not need to. But basically the idea is not so much if you're flying through, but if you're rotating around here, and we take a look, I'll just bring this up full view so we can really have a good look. And if we're at this angle, we can see that sharp or that shading in the inside where it doesn't look like it's an actual hole. And same thing with all these different points, and it really depends on angle. So you just want to have it so at no matter what angle you're at, you can pretty much see into it or even through some of the tubes that you would see through, especially this big one right here, because if we were up on top, we'd see through that. Although technically there is a chamber and different parts in here that would close that off. So we might even just bring that down into these pieces here and then leave it so it looks like this once you get to a certain point, and not so much all the way through. It really depends. These ones I am going to connect, and I'll show you how to do that.